Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. I am Stephanie Balkin, the Director of Arts and Talks and Adult Programs of JCC of Mid-Westchester. Arts and Talks is a wonderful program that's bringing world-class arts and culture to the heart of Westchester. And even though we can't be together in person right now, we're so excited about this virtual community that we've created. We've been bringing virtual programs to you for the past 2.5 months, which I hope and I think everyone has been enjoying. I'd like to say we're delighted to have UJA Federation of New York, Scarsdale Women, partnering with us on this program today. This is our Book Talk Thursdays, and you're in for a real treat with our friend Jackie Friedland. Just some housekeeping. Everybody will be muted. If you have questions for the author or for me, please put them into the chat, and I will, when we get to the Q&A portion of the program, I will refer to those. Additionally, we are being recorded, so you just know that. You need to do something, why don't you just take your video off, and that way we can use this in the future. We are so excited to have Jackie Friedland. This is the second time we have Jackie with us. She was part of our Ladies Who Lit literary salon, which we did last fall in our sukkah. And it's very timely because today is the Erev Shavuot, so we're on the cusp of a new holiday as well. So wishing you all Chag Sameach on that. So to Jackie, so excited to have you here. Jacqueline Friedland is a graduate of both the University of Pennsylvania, UPenn, and NYU Law School. She practiced as a commercial litigator at 2 New York law firms. After determining that office life did not suit her, Jackie began teaching legal writing and lawyering skills at Cardozo Law School. She was working on her book in her limited spare time. Finally deciding to embrace her passion and pursue writing full-time, Jackie returned to school to earn her Master's of Fine Arts from Sarah Lawrence College, graduating in 2006. When not writing, Jackie's an avid reader of all things fiction. She loves to exercise, watch movies with her family, listen to music, make lists, and dream about exotic vacations. And now it's certainly...
I can't hear my Zoom.
Oh, we're okay. We're gonna just make sure everyone is muted. Hold on, everyone should be muted there. Okay. So let me just unmute Jackie so she can actually speak later. Okay, so she lives in Westchester in Scarsdale with her husband, 4 children, 2 very bossy canines, and this is her second book. Many of you recall her first book, which was critically acclaimed, Trouble the Water. And Jackie is here to talk about her new book, That's Not a Thing, which it is a thing because it is a fantastic read. We are delighted to have Jackie here, and Jackie, take it away. And we'll have time for questions for Jackie throughout. So thank you and welcome to Arts and Talks. Thanks so much, Jackie.
Thank you, Stephanie. So hi, everybody. I was just saying as people were starting to log on that I've done since the release of this book several online events, but this is actually the first event where it's really interactive, where I can see people's faces and reactions and respond to people. So in a lot of ways, I feel like you have all come to my initial launch event. So thank you for that. And I also just want to thank the JCC and especially Stephanie and UJA and especially Michelle Sloan for putting this event together. And I'm just thrilled to be here. So thanks, everybody. So That's Not a Thing. As Stephanie said, it's my second book. And interestingly, to me at least, it really feels like it may have been the book that I was meant to write all along. As Stephanie said, I was a lawyer before I was a writer, and I chose becoming a lawyer because I was a responsible college student with no better ideas than law school. And at the time I didn't even think being a writer was a choice. It was sort of like being a rock star. Like, yeah, that'd be cool, but like, you can't just do that. So off I went to law school, and shortly after I began practicing, I discovered books like Good in Bed by Jennifer Weiner and Something Borrowed by Emily Giffin and the Something Blue, that whole series. And they were these sort of light but not stupid books written by women about women. And as I was reading them, I really began to feel, like I could do this. I could write something like this. And I decided, okay, I was going to try to do that. So right after I had my first child, when I was on maternity leave, I decided that was my opportunity and I was going to get that book written in my 3-month maternity leave. So I was 26 years old and obviously fairly naive about what would be entailed in having an infant at home. So I started a book, but it took me much longer than the 3 months that I had to write. So what was then elapsed as a 10-year period, I completed my first book, which was historical fiction. Stephanie said it's called Trouble the Water, and this is it. And it took me 10 years, I think, for several reasons. One, I was working as an attorney. 2, I was popping out my 4 kids with the help of my doctor, who is here. I'm so happy to see her. She's one of my favorite human beings on the planet. She delivered all 4 of my kids, and she's not in the state of New York. And it's so happy for me.
They should absolutely.
Jack, can I say she's one of my favorite human beings on the planet too?
She also.
My wife and I are both.
So I was popping out the 4 babies. But the fact that the novel was historical fiction also was required a lot of research, and that was a big amount of time also. And then there was just the confidence factor of, maybe I'm not doing this. Maybe I'm going to put it in a drawer for a few months, and then I would return to it because I had this deep, intense desire to become a writer, and I had decided that this was something that was feasible. So when I got the publication date for Trouble the Water, that was when I really hit the ground running, and I said, like, okay, now I'm going to try my hand at contemporary fiction, because what happened was when I first started writing, as I said, I was only 26 years old. I was at the beginning of everything. I had just started working. I had just gotten married. I had this brand new baby, and I really felt like I didn't have the life experience to write a substantial contemporary fiction book. But as I was writing the historical fiction, what I realized is that really, for me, the kind of books I would read or write, the heart of any story is the human relationships. And those are, it doesn't really matter whether you're in the 1800s or in 2020, the emotions that we as people experience are sort of constant. So, or the range of emotions, I should say. So when I finished my historical fiction, I decided, you know what, okay, I'm going to try and write this contemporary fiction. And I sat down at my computer, and in 9 months, I had a written book. It was like I put my fingers on the keyboard and this book just poured out of me. And a lot of people ask me what was the inspiration behind the book. And I actually have a couple of answers to that. But before I go there, let me just tell you a little bit about the book. So I describe That's Not a Thing as a New York City love story. It's about a young woman named Meredith Altman, who is working as a successful attorney in a big fancy law firm. She is engaged to a handsome superstar neonatologist, and it seems like the world is just falling at her feet, and she's just starting out, and everything is kind of looking perfect for her. But what you learn fairly quickly is that she had this first great love years earlier that ended in catastrophic disaster. And when her cousin takes Meredith and her fiance Aaron out to celebrate their engagement at this like trendy Tribeca new hot restaurant, they're about 2/3 of the way through their meal, and they start to think maybe they should have their wedding at the restaurant because it's so cool there. And they ask to meet the restaurant owner, who's also the chef. And when he comes over to the table, it turns out that he's none other than Wesley Latner, who was the man who had ghosted Meredith years earlier. And when she sees him, she realizes that she's not nearly as over him as she thought she was. And she's also at the same time horrified because she really is very much in love, she believes, with her current fiance, and she doesn't know how to reconcile these feelings. And as the story unfolds, she begins to bump into Wesley, the first fiance, at various places, a lot of their old stomping grounds, and he soon confides in her that he's recently been diagnosed with ALS. And Meredith knows that he does not have much of a support system, and she then is struggling with the guilt and the conflicting emotions of how she's supposed to be there for Wesley without destroying everything that she has set up for her own future. And she actually reaches a point where she struggles with the question of whether a few more good months with him might be worth tanking her whole future. And she can't decide. And while her life is just getting messier and messier, and really it's she who is making it into a bit of a mess, She's also struggling with the fact that she really sort of hates her job. It's not the kind of lawyer she wanted to be. She wanted to help people, and she has ended up in a career where she's helping big companies argue with each other, and a lot of them are companies that sell tobacco products and similar items, and she feels that she sold out for the salary, and she's trying to determine who she wants to be as a person, you know, in her career, in her romantic life, in her relationship with her own parents, and it all sort of comes to a head in the book, and she has to ultimately make some difficult choices. So that is the story in a nutshell. So when people ask me what was the inspiration for the story, it actually comes from a story that they're just a little seed, a kernel that I stole from my mother with permission, and with permission to admit that I stole from her. She, when I was a little kid, I grew up knowing that my mom had been engaged to another man before my father. And the story of their engagement and their love affair, I guess maybe as a little girl, I romanticized it, but I've always had it in my head. And basically, to tell it shortly, is my mom was in high school. An older guy in high school noticed her. He was super cool. He was super good looking. They started dating. He came around in his convertible to take her out. They fell deeply in love. They dated through college. They dated after college. They got engaged. And then when they were planning their wedding, the families argued about various things like families do as they were planning the wedding. And they ultimately, you know, resolved all of the issues. And as the wedding was getting very close, the groom's parents decided to take a vacation to de-stress from all of the arguing and the wedding planning. And as they were flying to whatever Caribbean island they were going to, they were on a small plane. The plane crashed into the water. Several of the people on the flight survived, but several did not. And the groom's father had not been wearing his seatbelt. He hit his head and he did not survive. So my mom's fiance blamed my mother's family for this, because had they not argued about the wedding, they would not have taken this vacation and none of this would have happened. So unfortunately, after trying to move past this, they never did manage to reconcile, and they ended up breaking their engagement just 3 weeks before the wedding. So I've always known this. I've always kind of wondered about this guy, and I just took this tiny little seed and built a whole story around it. And, you know, Meredith is not my mother. The entirety of the rest of the book is fictional. And in fact, several people have asked me if the book is autobiographical about me, because there are things, you know, Meredith is a lawyer, I was a lawyer. There are things that I have experienced in my own life that make appearances in the book. However, one thing that was very actually cathartic for me in writing this book was that I did take some things that happened to me in my life, like experiences with family members with illness, or experience with my parents getting divorced when I was in college. And what I got to do was do it my way and change things. And I picture like a piece of gum you take out of your mouth, or silly putty, and you pull it and you twist it. And I was in charge this time. And so I built a story of, imagine if it happened this way. And for those reasons, it sort of grew into its own entity. And the other thing that was also of equal inspiration to me in the story was playing with the idea of what ifs. I know many of you probably saw that movie with Gwyneth Paltrow years ago, Sliding Doors, where I think the thing was like, if she had gotten on the subway or if she had not gotten on the subway, and then it's two separate storylines of how her life plays out based on this like split second, seemingly unimportant decision. And it fascinates me that it's like, you know, the butterfly effect, that one little choice of, you know, if you waited 2 more seconds to make a phone call, whatever it might be, could have dramatic effects on how your life ultimately turns out. So I wanted to play with that also, in the way that, you know, if things had gone different with Meredith and Wesley, how would that have been? And if, you know, Aaron and Meredith had made different choices, what would happen? And so there are issues of closure and unknowns, and lots of things that I think are pretty universal questions that we as people have to deal with regularly. So those I also play with in the book. And finally, I just want to say, though, that despite the fact that there's all these heavy topics in the book, it's not a sad book and it's not a heavy book. It's actually kind of a good time. And I've been trying to figure out how that is. And I have come to credit Meredith, the main character, with that. I think she is a person who is on a singular pursuit of being happy. This is her mission, and she can't get it right. She keeps messing it up for herself, but that is her goal. And I think that it's her attitude and her optimism and her hopefulness that ultimately makes the book feel light enough that it's not weighing you down when you're reading it. And one last point, and then I'll stop talking. When I finished the book, I realized that I had also, in writing it, unintentionally written a bit of a love letter to New York City. When you're reading it, the characters are, they're romping through the city. They're going to all these different places that we've all been, that we all know. And several people have said to me, it's like taking a staycation to New York City. And I feel really happy about the fact that city, am I still okay? Sorry.
Yeah,
After our city has been so recently, or is still being, ravaged, that I've painted New York in all her glory in here, and I think it's a nice time for that. So it's one thing I'm happy about how the book came out. Now I'm done.
Well, we're not done
So,
because we have a million questions for you, but thank you so much for that overview. So I think two questions come up really quickly. One is, what's the meaning behind the title, unless that gives away the book for those who haven't read it? And also, given the time that we're in during this current pandemic, and also with everything that's going on, you alluded to the fact, or you said that how important it is for you that you were able to focus and show New York in such a wonderful light, especially now, how that makes you feel. Be very interesting to know what the process has been, and how has it been to release a book when you're supposed to be out on tour around the country and speaking engagements all over. What has that been like for you as an author? Okay,
so first, the title, I think, is the shorter answer, so I'll go with that first. The way the story plays out, Meredith, as I said, is in this pursuit. She doesn't want to have to give anything up. She wants what she wants, and she wants to figure out a way to take care of Wesley, to hang on to Aaron, to hang on to Wesley, and she makes a mess of everything. And there's a moment in the book where she's kind of saying to one of the two guys, I'm trying not to give any spoilers, that she wants everything, and he basically says to her, you can't have every single thing you want. That is not a thing. You have to make some choices. And that is where the title comes from, that there are times where we have to make difficult choices, and it's a part of life, and not choosing sometimes can't be a thing. And so that is where the title comes from. And I also I feel now that became my book title, it's like you hear it everywhere, every conversation. You're like, you can't do that. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
So I thought it belonged on a book cover.
Awesome.
And as far as releasing during the pandemic, some of you may have seen an article that I wrote recently about, I put it up on Facebook about a week before the book came out. My husband and I got engaged on September 10th, 2001, which was the night before September 11th, 2001. Because, nobody knew what was going to happen the next morning. And the emotions that I've experienced in releasing this book have been so similar to my feelings during that time, which were, you're so excited, and then something happens in the world that's so much bigger than your little bit of good news. And your little bit of good news in the grand scheme of things starts to feel like it doesn't really matter. However, but it's still your life, and you want to make the most of this happy thing. And so I remember the day, on September 11th, on September 12th, walking around the city, bumping into people because everyone was out on the streets, and not even knowing if I should tell them that we had gotten engaged, because it felt awkward to be sharing your good news. And I felt the same way. The book came out on April 14th, which was basically right at the moment where the deaths were peaking in New York. And it felt to me kind of gross to be like, but buy my book. But as time has gone on, and this is becoming the new normal, and life may be like this for who knows how long, this is my career. This is what I do. I write books. And what I hope is that I know, everybody's looking for escape. Everybody's trying to find ways to feel good despite what's going on in the world. And I hope that maybe this book, and future books and other authors' books are providing that for people. I saw a statistic somewhere that during the recession of 2008, and everyone was tightening their belts, but the luxury items that people continued to buy were like lip gloss and books, because they're small ticket items that give people some minute amount of happiness. And so the other thing that I need to say, though, is that the author community has been just outstanding. It's one of the reasons that I shied away from becoming a writer when I was like a teenager and in college, was that everybody says it's such a solitary job and a way to live. And I thought, I'm a people person, and that wouldn't be for me. But I actually have made so many more friends and peers and colleagues as an author than I ever did as an attorney. And I have found it very social, and I have this whole network of people, and everybody's been so supportive. And it's been really a lesson in how to behave as a human being for me. So that's my answer.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that, as many of you might notice, there are many of our Arts and Talks book authors, our authors here on this call, showing their support for Jackie and what we're doing here in our author community. So we really appreciate that sentiment. And I think it just goes back to, Jackie and I were speaking earlier, and also Michelle Sloan from UJA helped put this together, just how we plan for this event to be in person and all our hopes and dreams for this event. And you know what? We've got 70 people on this call, and we've got people now from all over the country, from Florida, New Jersey, California, who who would not have been coming to this event. And I think that just speaks to the kind of virtual community that we're creating. And of course, it's a testament to Jackie. So going on to twisting gears a little bit, I'd like to know a little bit about what is the experience, how is it different to write a current book versus historical fiction like you did with Trouble the Water? Seems like very disparate ideas, and I think some of our guests would like to hear about that as well.
So when I first decided I was going to write contemporary fiction after having written the historical, my first thought was, yay, less research, I'll move so much faster. It turns out I was largely wrong about the less research. As I mentioned, there are characters in the book who get sick, and that required quite a bit of research to get that right. But it's a different kind of research. It's much easier to say, does anyone know a doctor who deals with this, that, and the other? And then you get on the phone with the doctor and you have all your questions answered. And it's much different than having to go to a library and figure out the microfiche to look at documents from, the 1800s. So in that regard, it was a lot easier. The other thing that's sort of interesting about writing contemporary fiction is that it feels like everybody thinks it's about you. So you have to be really careful in what you name your characters and what they do and what they look like. And, I've had so many friends say to me, but you're not blonde, but that's not how it happened. But this is it. And I have to keep saying, but it's not me. I swear it's not me. I just, I've lived in places that appear in the book, and I've chosen areas that I know about to write about, but it doesn't mean that it's come from my own life. And finally, what I think is a little bit more difficult about writing contemporary fiction is that you're writing about a world that people know. So it's almost, when I wrote historical fiction, I felt like there was a responsibility that you're teaching people about a time period. So it's really important to get it right, because people are going to come away from it thinking that what you've said is fact. So, but with contemporary fiction, it turns out that everyone can tell you what you got wrong if you mess it up. And it will take people out of the narrative. It will be, like it interrupts it if you get something wrong. So in that regard, I really felt like almost more important to get every last detail on the nose.
Great. So a couple of people have asked us, why did you choose ALS for Wesley's character?
So I have to say, I'm very lucky that I don't have anyone in my life who has ALS, but I do have experience with close family members having chronic illness or potentially fatal illness. And I wanted to, the emotions that those, being a loved one of a sick person, or a caregiver of a sick person can evoke in a person, I think are really intense. And I wanted to explore that, but I chose ALS because I felt like it's really, it's a disease with no cure. It's a disease that affects a lot of people. And if you probably all remember a few years ago, there was the ice bucket challenge that went around on Facebook where everyone was dumping ice cold water on each other to raise money for ALS. And that was great. And then it kind of disappeared. And I don't know about you guys, but it's not like I'm hearing things all the time about ALS. But I felt that it's a condition and a disease that is so devastating for both the victim and the family members. And it seemed like a really good way to raise awareness about it. The thought of being trapped inside your brain as your body deteriorates around you, I still can't really wrap my head around it. I just think it's so awful. And I felt like it was a cause worthy of more attention.
Very interesting. I think that it's certainly a bold choice. And I think it's something that people can really feel very strongly about. So I think that's great. Obviously not the disease, but.
I'm sorry, before you ask the
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. Before you make the next, ask the next question, I just wanted to make a comment.
Sure,
yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we can't be all together in person today, but I'm thrilled that we're able to pull up a virtual event. Stephanie, I'm a big fan of you, and Jackie, of course. I've been following your career all along, and my daughter thought it was so cool that I got one of the ARCs, one of the early reader copies.
Nice.
And I just want to say, when you were talking about Jackie earlier about how you started to read women's fiction, and it was smart fiction, and I mean, that's exactly what this book was like. I mean, when I wrote my review about it, that, here you have this very intelligent main character, she's got this, huge career dilemma that she's working with. I mean, there's so much more depth to the character. And you know what? These are the kind of books that are great to read right now. I mean, people say it's not so easy to read during the pandemic. I have found lots of stuff to read, and I can't imagine not having books to read right now. So I loved it, and thank you.
Great, that's awesome.
Thank you.
Totally.
I'd just like to add that Michelle supplies me with all of my book recommendations. So if any of you are struggling with what to read, she's the person to go to.
Yes, Michelle knows every book that's come out even before it's come out and what's great to recommend. So let's talk a little bit about the fact that this is a Jewish event. Tell us a little bit about the Jewish aspects and the Jewish angle. There's a little bit about Jewish guilt and feeling like you've made choices and family and dynamics. And can you tell us a little bit? I know that you will be a JBC author, Jewish Council author this year. And how does the Jewish angle fit into this book? I think that'd be interesting to know.
So I was pretty excited to write a book that just kind of had Jewish characters without actually being like a Jewish book. There's no big Jewish question in the book. It's not a Holocaust book. There's no main characters who are Orthodox. So it's just Jewish people living their lives. But what was interesting to me was to see that, there are a number of life cycle events in the book. There's a death, and there's, the planning of 2 different weddings, and there's a Shiva. And it was kind of eye-opening to me to see as an adult the way that even for very Reformed Jews, religion comes into play at life's important moments. And somebody did ask me, there's a lot of guilt in the book. It's one of the kind of underlying themes. And is it a particularly Jewish guilt? And which then got me to thinking, like, well, what is Jewish guilt really? So I actually, in a move, I grew up I fairly Reform, and my husband grew up much more religious. And so he was very thrilled to see me on the computer, like looking up Torah and holiday services just to sort of get to the heart of what is Jewish guilt. And I landed on the fact that, you go to the high holiday services on Yom Kippur, you say this hours-long prayer apologizing for everything you've done wrong over the year, and then thinking about how you can be better. So are we to be guilty about it? I don't know, but there is definitely a big message in Judaism about you could always be better. You could pray more, you could help people more, you could do more mitzvahs, you could give more charity. That is for sure something that I think is a pervasive message throughout Judaism. And I think that Meredith as a character is sort of bred from that. You know, she, in her job, she's thinking, you know, is what she's doing making really any difference in the world, and how could she be doing better? And she takes on this one legal case where she's representing a guy pro bono who's seeking political asylum in the US, and it's the only case that matters to her. And so she realizes, you know, that sort of emphasizes for her how wrong the rest of her career choice has been for her as a person. And, you know, when somebody's sick, there is this idea of tikkun olam, that we as Jews are supposed to heal the world. And so Meredith gets teased throughout the book for sort of being like the savior of widows and orphans, that she, whenever she sees anybody who needs help, she wants to help. And so I think that in that way, it's a sort of, that is a Jewish aspect of the book. But as I take a step back, I think that, you know, all you have to do now is look at all the doctors who are helping out with the pandemic, and, you know, the front, everyone out there on the front lines. And you sort of see it's not just a Jewish thing, it's a human thing, and that there's a lot of people out there who, thank God, want to help. So I think it's Jewish, but hopefully universal.
Great. But I just wanted to mention, keep the chats coming, because if you have a question, we can ask Jackie that, as well as any comments. People have been putting in great comments so far, so thank you. That chat feature is available to you. Can you tell us a little bit about why you made Wesley a chef and have the restaurant? Is there any hidden meaning behind that? And besides that, do your readers have a particular character that's their favorite?
So Wesley is a chef for multiple reasons. First and foremost, as I was writing the book, I discovered that I am obsessed with food. I could get lost in these descriptions of the dishes that people were eating and creating, and I'm researching it. And then I mentioned it to my kids recently, that I had this realization, and they sort of said, what are you talking about? And I could rattle off every last food item in the book, like a split second. But I thought Wesley is he's just a visceral character, if that makes sense. And everything about him is like sensual and sensuous. And the food, I think, plays into that and just adds to it. Because if you picture, you know, there's a moment when in the first scene, when Meredith, after she has discovered that Wesley is the chef, and he has left the table, and she takes another bite of her food, and she pictures his hands on it and touching it. And all of a sudden it's like she's taking part of him into herself almost. And I just think food has this really, it's something we're all kind of deeply connected to, and it has this really sensual quality to it. So that is why he's a chef. There was a second part to your question, and I have forgotten.
Your readers seem to have a favorite character, or how do they feel about your different characters?
So one thing that has come as a shock to me is that everybody seems to be choosing Aaron. Everyone's team Aaron, which I think is kind of the grown-up choice. But for me, when I get asked who's my favorite character, it's I think Wesley. I just have such a soft spot for him. And the other thing that has been interesting to me is that people really get angry at Meredith for readers for how she behaves in the book. She makes bad choices repeatedly, and readers can't stand that. Multiple people have said to me, I just want to take her and shake her, which has sort of been interesting too, because I think in a lot of ways, Meredith kind of represents all of our sort of deeper desires that we might not give into, where we think, you know, but why can't I stay up till midnight on a school night or whatever, like a silly things, but the things where, and she's going to do it. She just makes every wrong choice. And so, but it's who she is, and she has to learn and grow.
Somebody asked us to, first of all, congratulate you on your New Generation Indie Book Award, which is fantastic.
Oh,
and have you submitted how does it work with submitting to different awards? I think you were in Goodreads, and you have a lot of really wonderful accolades coming your way. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And of course, everybody wants to know, what are you working on next?
So submitting for different awards, you know, there's tons of different contests, and it's hard to know which are the ones that like matter versus just these random things where you can win awards and put stickers on your book. But my publisher has kind of guided me and said, enter this. So I did. And and I won, which I was really excited about. It's my actually Trouble the Water won a couple of awards, but this is the first award that's a first place award. So I'm very excited about that. And
what are you working on next?
thank you. It's very hard for me to keep track of multiple things in my head. What I am working on next is another contemporary fiction novel. It's more of less of a romance and more of kind of general women's fiction. I would say it's a family saga about a case of surrogacy that goes wildly wrong because of a medical event that is pretty rare that I don't want to give too much away. But it's almost finished, and it's basically one of the pitfalls that's very unlikely of surrogacy, but how it plays out between two families who are then arguing over the same child.
Oh, wow. That sounds really intriguing. Does anybody have a question for Jackie? Just want to make sure we are getting everybody's comments. And here, will there be an audiobook? As I just mentioned to Jackie, I listened to Trouble the Water last night on Scribd. So is this coming out in an audio version?
It may. It was sort of on track before the pandemic and then got derailed. And so at present, there's no imminent plans for an audiobook, but hopefully eventually there will be an audiobook.
Fantastic. So when do you expect that this new book will come out? Not to pressure you or rush you, but we are just excited.
I'm hoping winter 2021. If we're lucky.
Great.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that about the book specifically that we haven't touched on that you'd like people to know?
I would say that I mentioned earlier there was a case of political asylum that Meredith works on. I do think that that's an interesting part of the book that gets less airtime for some reason. She is representing a man from Myanmar who has come to the US and has this horrible story of what happened to him in his own country. And then when he escaped from there and had to go to a refugee camp and how he got into the US. And it's just a snippet of what a lot of refugees experience and of also what's been going on in Myanmar for years. And it was interesting writing it because I was working on it, a couple of years ago. Trump was in office, the immigration laws were changing like by the day. And it was kind of a struggle for me to keep up with it and make sure I didn't get anything wrong. But thankfully the case in the book was actually a little bit behind in the chronology of our country. We were a little bit behind in the book. So, but I had to just kind of keep pace. And I just think it's an interesting part of the book because it helps Meredith as she is, lamenting this very difficult position she has found herself in. She has this guy Mo and the life that he's just left and the position he is in as a contrast to her own life, and it kind of puts things in perspective for her at different times and almost helps inform how she proceeds with her future. And I don't know, it was an interesting part of the book to me.
Great. So I'm just looking through the chat to see if we have any other questions. I think that we don't, but I do. So so you're working on your book, you are working. How are you handling writing? Where are you writing, given that your entire family is at home, as you said, and hermetically sealed for the last 2.5 months? How is your writing process now?
So for the first couple of weeks that we were home, I was like completely on pause, did nothing. Then I realized, wow, we could be home forever and I have to get busy writing. So I sat down in the office that is usually during the day, all mine, but at night is shared between my husband and me, which is now has become mostly his. And he's a very loud talker when he's on the phone. For every call's on speaker and he's shouting even when, happy things, but he's loud. So I have learned to put in headphones and put white noise on, which is actually pretty effective. The only problem is that I have my third grader coming into the room every 10 minutes or so to say, I need help with this, I need help with that. And she does need help. And so that has been difficult. What I have decided is I actually have a fourth book that I'm playing with. And It's historical fiction, and it will require mountains of research. And I'm finding it much easier to do that research than it is for me to create new material at the moment. So I've decided just within the last couple of days to focus on the research for now, because it's the only way I'm feeling productive. At some point, I'm going to have to make a new plan, because I can't just research.
Right.
But that is where I am at the moment. I find even when life was normal, I found that, you know, the kids would go off to school, my husband would go off to work, and it would take me a good hour of quiet, of sitting at the computer, before I really felt like I was doing any good writing. And I always say that my third hour of writing in a day is always better than the two that were before it. And I've come to learn when my brain functions well. I know that if I write at night, it's not going to be good. Whatever I can create in the morning will be faster and better than whatever garbage I attempt to achieve at night, because my brain is just tired. So I've learned all these things, and hopefully as time at home persists or not, I will learn how to adapt more.
What is the book on historical fiction about? Can you tell us?
It's about a runaway slave.
Oh, okay.
But an actual runaway slave, like a real person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing. Okay, so with that, I want to say thank you so much to Jackie. You have been an inspiration. I think that the fact that you left your lawyer work and decided to fulfill your dream of being a writer, and in such a huge effort, and you're going to have 4 books out there. We're so privileged to have you in our community, and have you as a friend of the JCC of Mid-Westchester and UJA, of course. We are super thrilled to have had you here this morning. I hope you enjoyed the coffee and conversation. I just want to let everyone know that this will be available. We will make this available, so if you want to forward it to friends who were unable to be there. I got some notes from people who unfortunately couldn't make it right now, but would love to watch it at a later time. I would like to also say thank you again to UJA, to Michelle Sloan, to Jackie for being here, and let you know a little bit about what we have coming up. We have on June 2nd, we have our crossword coach. We have someone walk us through crossword, New York Times crossword puzzles. It's a hoot and a lot of fun, and makes you feel very smart when you're done the Saturday crossword. We have Susie Fishbein next week, 3 ways to make chicken. Should be delicious and fun, and that's in partnership with American Friends of Magen David Adom, Alana Newhouse from Tablet Magazine, Mimi Roca and Maya Wiley talking about justice in today's world, MSNBC analysts, a tour of the Jewish Museum, Cinema Judaica book talk with Jewish Book Council, and a lot more planned for the summer. I would be remiss to say, if you've noticed, all of our Arts and Talks programming has been complimentary over the past 2.5 months. So if you're so inclined, we'd really appreciate any kind of donation or support to the JCC of Mid-Westchester. It's the only way that we can keep these programs going and bring this virtual community to you. And it's been so wonderful to see all of you here this morning, to see all these familiar faces from our world. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. So I am going to unmute everybody. Thank you again, Jackie, so that you can all chit chat and see each other for a little bit.
Thanks, Jack.
And
thank you.
The 12 and the
Thank you.
So it's the label for the picture.
Thank
So
you,
it's
Jackie.
A, it says A is
Thank
1293 minus
So
19.
it was all
Terrific. Bye, Jackie.
Hi, Mom.
Love Jackie.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jackie. That was great.